Our lesson today is lesson number 5. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams. Before we get started, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for the many blessings that you have given us, Lord. We thank you for your protecting hand upon each and every one of us, Lord. Lord, we just pray that you'll have your way in the service today. In the Sunday school, Lord, we just pray that everything will be said and done according to your will, Lord, and that they won't hear me, but they'll hear the Holy Spirit, Lord. And we just pray that you'll be to us what you want to be to us, Lord. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, we're studying about Joseph, and when we started studying the 5 lessons ago, I asked the class how many Josephs was mentioned in the Bible. And I noticed in one Bible that there is, believe it or not, 14 different Josephs that was mentioned in the Bible. And that was a surprise to me, because I could name only about 3 or 4, different ones, but there's 14 according to this one Bible that was mentioned in the Bible. So, but Joseph, Joseph is a son, is one of the sons of Israel. What was his name before? Jacob. Jacob was his father, and he had 12 sons, and Joseph was one of those sons. So, kind of to set the picture there, he went to visit his brothers, and they were very jealous of him. They sold him to a group of people that was traveling to Egypt, and to get rid of him, because they didn't like him very good, because he had dreamed some dreams and one thing and another, and they sold him to Egypt. They thought they living in Canaan where they were at, and Egypt was quite a little ways away, and they thought, well, they'll never see him again. They won't have to worry about him and one thing and another. And so that's where our lesson is. He's in Egypt. He's far away from his family and all, and he's in Egypt now. And he has already interpreted a couple of dreams for guys that were thrown into prison. One dream was that the guy was going to be released in 3 days, and he was going to be back serving Pharaoh. The other one, the other guy that had the dream, he said in 3 days he was going to be hanged, and that's what happened then. And so now Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, now has had some dreams, and we're going to get into that. Let's look at the memory verse there. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, God he's talking about, and he, God, shall direct thy paths. And sometimes what happens to us does not seem like it's what God's will is. To us, it looks like there's no way this can be God's will. But, if we follow God, the things that happen to us is going to be God's will, one way or another. It's just like Joseph. Joseph being put in prison and having to suffer at this time, being in prison, was all part of God's will. Believe it or not. Joseph probably even had doubts himself. Here things has happened, and this does not look like it's God's will. But eventually, as we progress in the story, we figure out, it was all part of God's will. God just putting the pieces together, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, and it all comes out. A mixed up jigsaw puzzle doesn't look very good. But that there's a pretty picture. Sure. There's a pretty picture when it's all complete, and it takes work to complete each piece. You know, most of the time our family likes to put jigsaw puzzles together. We always like to put the border on, you know, and that way we know how big the thing's going to be, you know. Then you start working on the easier part, and of course, usually the sky is the last to be put together because it's all the same color, you know, and all. Unless there's clouds in there, you know, it makes it a little different, but you know. And then when that last piece is put in, there it is. That jumbled up mess, there it is, just pretty as it can be, you know. And that's kind of the way we are, you know, in our everyday life. So let's look at the adult emphasis there. I normally read the junior emphasis, which is not in there, but it's very short and simple. So I'm going to read the adult emphasis there. Pharaoh had twofold dreams, and his spirit was troubled. No one could be found to interpret his dreams. Then the butler remembered Joseph in prison and told Pharaoh. Joseph told Pharaoh the dream came from God, and catch this part. He told Pharaoh, he said, this dreams came from God, and it's not me interpreting the dream, but it's God give me the interpretation so I can give it to you, and is what he said. Dream came from God to warn him of the coming famine, okay, that would consume the land. Pharaoh put Joseph in full charge of storing crops in preparation for the lean years. And famine is a drought where crops don't grow. That's what that is, in case you didn't know. I'll read the junior emphasis. Here it is. Step by step, God led Joseph. He was working out his plan. That kind of sums up everything there. I mean, it was very short. That's all the emphasis was in the junior quarterly. And so, but I kind of wanted to read that to go along there. We'll get started reading here in the first one. It's a lengthy reading here. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed. Now, the 2 full years is what he's talking about, is the butler and the baker was released from prison. The butler was restored back to his butlership to the Pharaoh, and the baker was hanged for his offenses. And Joseph had told the butler, because he knew the butler was going to live, but he knew the baker was going to die, because he had told him that. And he told the butler, he says, remember me down here in prison. You know, remember me. Don't forget about me down here in prison. And, you know, kind of throw in a good word for me. Okay, let's see what happens. And it came to pass at the end of 2 years, 2 years, before the butler remembered Joseph. And behold, he stood, and so Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine. Am I saying that right? Kine. Okay, and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. Kine is cattle, is what it is. Okay, and behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. He woke up. And then he fell asleep again and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good, big, plush. Okay, it could be any kind of grain, but let's just figure a big old ear of corn. And there's 7 of them on a stalk. You know, farmers likes to have at least 2 on a stalk. 3 is real good, and you hardly never see 4. But this guy saw 7 of them on a stalk of corn. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blast with east wind sprang up after them. Verse 7, and the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears, and Pharaoh woke up again, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men throughout, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, 2 years late. We look at it as being 2 years late. God looks at it as being right on time. But we look at it as being 2 years late. Why didn't you mention me 2 years ago? Joseph could have thought, but that wasn't the time. That wasn't the time. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants and put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and chief butler. And we dreamed a dream in one night, and I and he, we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man. This is all the butlers telling the Pharaoh all of this. A servant in the captain of the guard, and he told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams, and each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, he is interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto my office, and him he hanged. Now that was all that the butler told Pharaoh. Oh, I have a recollection. I remember a young boy down in the prison that interpreted 2 dreams. One for me, one for the butler. Or one for me and one for the baker. And that came true. And he says, why can't that boy interpret dreams for you? That's what he's saying. 2 years. 2 years. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his garment and came unto Pharaoh. Prepared himself to appear before the king. He was in the dungeon. He was probably hadn't had a bath for a while. You know, after we had our little jog, I didn't jog, but or walk or whatever, we go home, and you know, some of us took a shower. Some of them took a shower before they come to church, and we're glad they did, aren't we, Brother Bell? Yeah. Mm-hmm. But they got presented. They got presentable before they come to church. Well, that's what he did before he met the king. Got presentable to appear before the king. And he shaved himself and changed his garment, came unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. You know, he's kind of putting Joseph on a pedestal, isn't he? You know, I understand. You can interpret the dream. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. The other butler might have told you that, but it's not in me. I want to give the right person due respect, is what he's saying. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And he reflected back to God as to God being the interpreter. He couldn't interpret the dream no more than anybody else could. But it was God that was giving him the interpretation of the dream. I'm going to read verses 17 to 24. It's not in your quarterly there, but I'm going to read it here. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, in my dream, behold, I stood before the bank of the river. And it's basically what we had already read. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well favored, and they fed in the meadow. And behold, 7 other kind came up after them, poor and very ill-favored, and lean-fleshed, such as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kind did eat up the first 7 fat kind. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored, as at the beginning, so I awoke. In other words, these fat cattle were standing out here, and these 7 real lean, skinny cattle came and ate up the fat cattle, and when they did, they stayed lean. That's what he's bringing out. And I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, thin and blasted with the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. Let's go to verse 25. It's in your quarterly there. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. That's what he's saying. God is the one that is giving the interpretation, and he's showing it to you what is about to happen, is what he's saying here. Now remember, Joseph was how old when he was sold into Egypt? He was 17, okay? We don't know quite how old he is yet, but we're going to run into how old he was here in a little bit. But he was 17 and when he was sold into Egypt. He was sold to a man that was right under the king Pharaoh, to a man by the name of Potiphar. And he was Potiphar's servant until he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. And so here's now he has spent some time in prison now. And now this is what's happening. The 7 good kind are 7 years, and the 7 good years are 7 years. The dream is one. That's what he's talking about. You got 2 pictures of the same thing. You know, that's what he's saying. He says you've dreamed 2 dreams, but they have the same meaning. And the 7 thin and favored kind that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blasted with the east wind, shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showed unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. Boy, that sounds good. You know, 7 years of plenty. Boy, the economy's going to do very good. You know, they're probably interested. Pharaoh was probably interested in the economy of Egypt at that time. Well, that sounds real good. You know, that sounds like real prosperous. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. Ooh, that don't sound very good. It sounds like that we better get prepared, because there's 7 bad years that's coming. I can remember back in, I'm going to start telling my age here, but I can remember back in 1979, that was probably before most of you younger ones, and the ones that was alive were too young to remember 79. I'm referring to you, Brian. I think he was about 2 years old in 79. 79 was a good year up there in Missouri for farmers. It really was. But we did not know that 80 was going to be horrible. And 80 was horrible, I'll tell you. I have never seen a year like 1980 was. Corn got up a little bit, started tossing. Then came the blast of hot weather came at that time then, turned the top leaves of the corn practically silver, kind of. Just looked like somebody had poured scalding water on it, you know. The ears formed, but it was more or less just an empty cob. Maybe a few little kernels on the ears of corn, but it was just mainly cob. What it done was cook the tassel, and that's where the flour, that's more or less the flour of a corn is the tassel, and it couldn't pollinate because it just cooked it more or less. It was so hot. We had several days in a row that it was over 100 degrees, you know, and it just cooked it, and it couldn't pollinate. And therefore you got a little cob, and a lot of the cobs wasn't over this long, and maybe every once in a while you'd get some that had just a little few kernels on that. There was so much of that corn that was growing in the field, and the farmer seen it wasn't going to produce anything. So what they done is they chopped it up for silage to feed cattle. And there was, I don't know how many acres of corn that was put in silage, put in to use to feed cattle. So silage is what it was. And the beans didn't do very good. The milo didn't. I mean, it was a horrible year. It was a horrible year. We as Dad and I fed we was raising hogs at that time. We fed them what we had for them, and we the next year when we got ready to sow. Well, that fall we seen that the crops wasn't going to be very good, and we planted a crop that we had never planted before, and that was barley, because we could plant that in the fall. It would grow, get started in the fall, and then it would winter through, and then it would start growing just as soon as warm weather came in the spring, and then barley comes off usually in May and June. In that area. Well, that's what we planted so that we could raise hogs then, you know. But see, you know, these people here, they have an idea of what's going to happen. We had no idea that was going to happen, but that's what happened. Let me go ahead and start reading here. I think I read and went through verse 30. Let me start with 31 here. It won't be in your quarterly there, but I'm gonna read it here. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason that the I'm having a hard time saying that word. Famine. Thank you. Following, for it shall be very grievous, and for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. In other words, here's the picture, here's another picture. You know, if you get a picture of something and then you get another picture of something, that pretty much instills that in your mind, doesn't it? Pretty much. It's like a double whammy, so to speak, you know. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. In other words, it's going to happen. And I want you to have a clear picture. Have you ever been talking to someone and they might kind of be giving you a little bit of attention, and then you repeat that to them to make sure that they catch it? You know, children, you kind of got to do that to children a lot of times. I can remember when I was a child, you know, Dad would tell me to do something, and then he would repeat it, and you think, why does he repeat? Well, I wasn't paying too much attention the first time. I better pay attention, you know. Kind of get a grip on what he's saying, because if he's repeating that second time, it must be pretty important of what he's telling, and it better get done, or consequences is going to be a result of that. And so that's what it was. It was a kind of a double whammy there. And it said, because the thing is established by God, it's going to happen. God helped Joseph, and Joseph told the meaning of the dream. He said the two dreams meant the same. The 7 good cattle, the 7 good years were 7 years of plenty. Then much food would be grown in Egypt. After that would follow 7 years of famine. And the 7 lean cattle and the 7 empty years meant 7 years, which meant 7 years when no food would grow. God sent 2 dreams because the thing is established by God. Moreover, it would come to pass very soon. The famine would be so serious that all the plenty would be forgotten. It'd be used up, and you think, well, how could that be forgotten, Well, let me ask you a question. How important was your lunch Friday? It was pretty important, wasn't it? How many of you can tell me what you ate Friday? It's, it might be a little bit of a problem, huh? It was forgotten, but it was very important at the time, wasn't it? It was very important. But, so, that's kind of what he's talking about here. The plentiful years is going to be eat up by the leaner years, and it's going to be all forgotten about, So that's what he's kind of talking about here. Let's go to verse 33. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man. He gave him the interpretation. God gave Joseph the interpretation. Joseph gave Pharaoh the interpretation. And now Joseph, being a little Hebrew prisoner boy, is kind of giving Pharaoh, or suggesting to Pharaoh, a good plan here. He says, let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and let him and set him over the land of Egypt. I think that would be a good thing, Pharaoh, if we do that. Or if you would do that. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. A 5th part. What's a 5th part? Anthony, you know what a 5th is, don't you? What percent is a 5th? 20. 20%. That's what he's talking. Income tax right here. That's what it is income tax. He's almost CPA, so that's the reason why I'm saying that. It's 20%. It's an income tax. People, we got to get prepared for this. It's going to cost you, 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 so that all of us can live. It's going to cost everybody. If you raise corn, it's going to cost you 20%. If you raise soybeans, it's going to cost you 20%. If you raise something else, it's going to cost you 20%. See? And we're going to store this up because we're going to get prepared for these bad years. 20%. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. I'm having an awful time with that word, ain't I? So, little old Joseph has got an idea here that sounds pretty good. And let's go to verse 37 there. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. Hey, what this little feller kind of suggested sounds like a pretty good deal. I'm all in favor. Them servants of Pharaoh says, yeah, I'm all in favor of doing that. If that's what's going to happen, which he seems to think it's going to happen, which he's already interpreted some dreams before that did happen, we better get prepared. What if we get prepared here and it don't happen? What harm is it going to do? What if we don't prepare and it does happen? There's 2 consequences that can happen there, You know, that might be some of the things that went through their minds, you know. And so Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. And the Hebrew boy down in Egypt becoming vice president or next to Pharaoh. And thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. Sounds like it made him a vice president. Secretary of Commerce. Secretary of what? You know, I mean, that's what he said. He just got a cabinet member, didn't he? And so he says, only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. What's significant of this? A gold ring on his hand. From the way I understand, that was a seal that the king sometimes had, and he says, I'm going to trust you with this seal here, that when you stamp that into something, I am in agreement with that. That's what he's talking about there. Boy, he put a lot of trust in this little Hebrew feller, didn't he? But yet, he had enough confidence in Joseph and he had seen what had already happened, because the butler had told him what had happened in the interpretation of the two dreams. Pharaoh was the one that put the two guys in prison. And he knew that one of them was restored back, and he knew that the other one was put to death. And he says, well, that's what we'll do then. That's what we're going to do. You're going to have the seal. You're going to have the law writing ability right after me, is what he's saying. That's what Pharaoh said. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler all over all the land of Egypt. I wrote on this right after that, don't let this go to your head. And I was telling Joseph, don't let this go to your head. And you know, as we read on down through here, he didn't. He did not let that go to his head. He accepted this humbly because he knew that God was in control. And you know, that's what we have to do. You know, as we live our life, we have to accept what God has for each and every one of us. Each and every one of us have to accept it humbly, what God has for us. Because I don't have to be the one up here teaching. You know, God could call someone else that's not even here to be the teacher. It's not that I'm so important that I'm the teacher here. It's not that I've got such great learning. Well, you know, I can't even pronounce that one word there. Phantom. I ain't going to say it. But it's not that. But it's, I have to accept my position very humbly. I'm not the ruler. God's the ruler. God's the ruler. And that's the way he did. He accepted his position here. And I'm sure that every night or every morning or sometimes maybe 2 or 3 times during the day, God, help me in the decisions that I need to make each and every day. Because this guy's going to come and bring some of his produce to us. Just help me to be able to know what to do, where to put it, how to take care of it. Because it was all up to God. I'm only your servant. I'm only the tool in your tool shed that you can use. And I'm willing to be used however way you want to be used. Don't let it go to your head, and I don't think he did. And Joseph said, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Brother Bayless, could I get you so kindly to read the next 3 verses, because I know there's some words in there that I am not going to be able to pronounce even at my best there. So if I can get you to read them next 3 verses, I'd appreciate it. 45.
45.
Yes.
And you want me to say those words?
You're more apt to than I am.
And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephaniah.
Okay.
Gave him the wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. If anybody has a problem with the way he pronounced that, why, let me know. I don't see any takers, so I think you've done an excellent job there. Okay, so Joseph's got a wife now. His name's been changed. And I'm not even going to start that word, but I'm going to call him Joseph, but you'll know who I'm talking about. Joseph's name's been changed. This is an Egyptian name. Joseph was a Hebrew name, and now he's living down in Egypt, so they give him an Egyptian name then. They gave him a wife there, and he went out over all the land of Egypt. He was an overseer of all the land of Egypt there, checking on things, getting things prepared, getting warehouses set up or rented or leased or whatever, so that they can put their product in there. Joseph, it says, was 30 years old. Now, how old was he when he was sold into Egypt? Somebody had already mentioned that he was 17 when he was sold into Egypt. What's 30 minus 17? 13. 13. He's been in Egypt now for 13 years. 13 years. They just released a man that has served in prison for 10 years, and I'm sure he thought that was a long time. I'm talking about O.J. Simpson, and I'm sure that he thought that was a long time. But this is 3 more years than what he has served, And so, when you're in prison or when you're in a place that you really don't want to be, but this was God's will, but I'm sure Joseph would not have picked Egypt to be at, but that's where he was. But he was there for 13 years. He wasn't going to run away. He couldn't run away. There was no way he could be able to run away and run back to Canaan land. He was there more or less as a prisoner, as a servant. And so, 13 years he's already spent there. But, he's making the most out of it. He's had a rough go so far. But now he's in a position to where he's part of the cabinet of Pharaoh. He's second in command, Well, I don't quite understand how this was working out, but Lord, if there's somewhere else I need to be, show it to me, but I'm going to continue until you show me different, you know. And that's what's happening here. And so he took control. He was in the presence of Pharaoh. He went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the verse 47 there, and in the 7 plenteous years, the earth brought forth by hands full. I think Joseph was probably 30 years old before the 7 years started, don't you think? Okay, that's okay. I think most of us are in agreement with that. So after the plenteous years, then that's another 7 years. That's 20 years then, being in prison then, or being down in Egypt then. So here we go now. Let's look at verse 48. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities, the food of the field which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. Some of us has lived, well, not me, but some people has lived close to the ocean, haven't they? I've been to the ocean. I've seen the sand. Well, you grab up a handful of sand and try and number how many grains of sand there is. That's awful hard to do. But just think, the whole ocean, the whole seaside, or the whole shore, how much that would be. It would be without number. And that's what he's talking about. They were getting prepared because God had showed them something, that he was giving them a warning that you better get prepared. And so that's what he's all working to one end, is what he's working to. We're not going to get to it today, but all working to one end, you know, is what he's doing here. But the grain was without number. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of the famine came, which his wife, I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, the daughter of, and that you can see that in your lesson there, priest of On, bared unto him. And Joseph named the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God said, this is what Joseph is saying, for God, says Joseph, have made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. That's what the word Manasseh means there. And the name of the second named he Ephraim. For God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of plenteous that was in the land of Egypt were ended. In other words, 7 years went by. They've stored and stored and stored and stored, getting prepared, because there's 7 more years that's coming that's not going to be so plenteous. And so verse 54 there, and the 7 years of drought began to come, according as Joseph has said, and the drought was in all lands, but in all of the land of Egypt there was bread. I'm going to read 2 more verses there, the 2 verses that it left out. And when all the land of Egypt was flourished, the people cried, famished. In other words, when it started being, the famine started coming, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, go unto Joseph. What he says to you, do. Whatever he says to do, you better do it, because he's in control of that. I've got other things I've got to mess with. Pharaoh might have said, He says, I've got other things to take care of. I put Joseph in charge of that, and so you got to go talk to him. And the famine was all over the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians. And the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. In other words, he didn't just open up them storehouses and say, here, go come and get whatever you want. But, he had control over these storehouses because a lot of people that came probably thought, well, this is a bad year. Next year is going to be a whole lot better. Well, the second year was bad too. Well, surely it won't be 3 years in a row, Let's go ahead and use this all up, No. There's going to be 7 years of this because that's what God told Joseph. There's going to be 7 years of the. We got to divvy out according to your family size. We got to divvy out according to however is needed. We don't want to waste it. I know me working in the kitchen at schools, I see a terrible lot of waste. And I know Sister Bayless and Paula, being teachers, also sees the same thing. Wastefulness. I'm telling you, if I would say more than half, wouldn't you say more than half of the food that is served is probably thrown away? At least a third. Okay, yeah. I put it almost a half myself, but terrible lot of it is wasted, And I think that's liable to come back and hurt the United States eventually. It could. I'm not saying it will, but it could. I'll tell you. But Joseph had enough wisdom that, hey, we're going to divvy out just what you need. We're not going to give you extra. We're going to give you out just what you need there. And so that's what happened. And then verse 57, I think that one's in your quarterly there. And all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the land. So, it didn't just only affect Egypt, but it affected all the surrounding countries around about. God allowed that to happen. And, we're going to find out later on that He's going to bring that family back together. Only it's going to be down in Egypt. It's not going to be in Canaan. It's going to be down in Egypt. I'm letting you have a peek of something that's in the future. We're going to be studying about it here for long. But here it took years and years and years and years, it seems like. We can look back on our life, and what did we have that figured up? There was 13 years, and then there was 7 years, and now they're in the lean times now. So 13 and 7 is 20 years, and we think, man, that's a long time. But you think back 20 years ago. What happened 20 years ago? What happened 20 years ago? Well, my mother-in-law moved down here 20 years ago. And it don't seem like it's been that long, You get to thinking back on things like that, That ain't been that long ago. But then if you was in prison like Joseph was, it seemed like it was forever, And so, it's all kind of the perspective of what you put your thoughts on, And each and every day we need to live according to what God has for us, because we can look back and we can think, that was good times. That was good times. Still today is good times, but that time went so fast. I'll tell you, time goes fast. I know when I was a child, time seemed like it just dragged, especially when I was in school. Well, as soon as I got out, because I didn't like school, and that was the reason why for that. But then as soon as school got out, man, it just seemed like years clicked off. I can remember, I went 12 years to school, 1st through 12th. I can remember being out of school 12 years. My 12th anniversary of graduation. And I got to thinking, I thought, I could have went through school again in that amount of time, and it went so fast. Well, guess what? The next 12 even went quicker. And the next 12 even went quicker. And so on, But we have to keep God focused in our mind at all times, because we never know when God is going to either come back and get us or take us. One or the other. We have to be ready, and we have to be focused on God. And I know that's what Joseph did. Let me read a thing here. It's in the commentary. No. It's going to be, well, it's in the junior commentary, but it's a lot like the last part of tracking lines of truth. There is kind of what it was. Joseph, a type of Christ. Joseph, one, was 30 years old when he began his work. Did you ever think of that? I guess I'd probably thought of it before, but this gave me a recollection of it. His work was to save physical life or the life of bodies. Jesus, one, was 30 years old when he began his work. And two, his work was to save spiritual life or the lives of souls. You know, isn't that something? 30 years. 30 years. And you know, I think is the price that they paid Joseph was similar to the price that betrayed Jesus, you know? So it's showing a type there of being preserved, and we'll find out that his family was preserved because of that, and we are preserved because of what Jesus did. I'm going to leave it with you then. Thank you, audience. I appreciate each and every one that's in attendance.